Imagine the crack of ice underfoot, a mother's heartbeat thundering like Judgment Day. In the dead of winter 1856, Margaret Garner clutched her infant tight, her blade still warm from an act that defied hell itself. Was it murder, or mercy from a God who watches the oppressed? One step across that frozen abyss, and America's sinful secrets would bleed into the light, forever haunting the nation that chained her soul. The wind howled like a chorus of damned spirits across the Ohio River that January night in 1856, carrying whispers of rebellion and retribution. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, not just freezing flesh but hardening resolve, turning ordinary folk into vessels of divine fury or desperate folly. The river, that serpentine divider of fates, had transformed into a treacherous mirror of ice, reflecting the moon's pale judgment on the world below. On the Kentucky side, shadows clung to the tobacco fields like sins unconfessed, while across in Ohio, flickering lanterns promised a fragile illusion of sanctuary. But promises, in those days, were as brittle as the frost underfoot. Margaret Garner knew this better than most. Born into the maw of Maplewood Plantation around 1834, no precise date etched in any ledger, for what value was there in marking the arrival of property? She had grown under the unyielding gaze of masters who played God with human lives. The plantation sprawled across 800 acres of Boone County soil, rich with the blood sweat of the enslaved, yielding tobacco that stained fingers yellow and hemp that bound ropes for ships or nooses alike. The main house loomed atop its hill, a white-columned temple to hypocrisy, where John Pollard Gaines sipped his evening brandy, quoting scripture about dominion over the earth while ignoring the divine spark in those he owned. Inside those walls, Gaines fancied himself a benevolent patriarch, attending Sunday services at the local Baptist church, his voice rising in hymns of redemption and grace. Yet his mercy was a thin veil over the abyss. He didn't whip without reason, didn't starve without cause. But his ownership was absolute, a sin woven into the fabric of Kentucky law. Slaves shall be deemed, sold, taken, reputed, and adjudged in law to be chattels personal, the code declared, reducing souls to inventory. Margaret, light-skinned with eyes like polished obsidian, eyes that pierced through lies, bore the mark of this twisted piety. Whispers in the quarters named Archibald K. Gaines, the master's son, as her father, his nocturnal visits a ritual of violation that echoed the biblical tales of Hagar, cast out and forsaken, her offspring a reminder of unchecked power. The quarters themselves were a purgatory of rough-hewn cabins, clustered like forgotten prayers at the field's edge. Thin plank walls, chinked with mud that cracked in winter's grip, let in drafts that whispered of escape or doom. Margaret shared the third cabin with her mother Priscilla, two aunts whose names were spoken only in hushed reverence, and a tumble of children whose laughter was a fragile defiance against the overseer's shadow. Privacy was a myth here. You learned to avert your eyes from the welts blooming like dark flowers on a neighbor's back, to muffle sobs in threadbare quilts, to ignore the rhythmic creak of floorboards under midnight burdens. The air smelled of wood smoke and sweat-soaked earth, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of lye soap from endless scrubbing. At night, the sounds built a symphony of suffering, a child's whimper, a woman's stifled prayer, the distant bay of hounds trained to hunt human scent. Priscilla, Margaret's mother, was a pillar carved from endurance, her back bowed from years bent over washboards and cooking fires. Bought at a Lexington auction as a girl, torn from her own kin like a page ripped from a holy book, she rarely spoke of her past. Slavery's cruel alchemy turned memories to poison, better to forget, to focus on survival, on teaching her daughter the subtle arts of resistance. "The Lord sees all," she'd murmur, her voice a low rumble like thunder on the horizon, quoting psalms where the wicked are ensnared in their own nets. But in her eyes, Margaret saw the flicker of doubt. Was God truly watching, or had he turned away from this land of chains? Margaret's intelligence burned like a forbidden flame. The overseers, rough men with whips coiled like serpents, eyed her warily. Slaves weren't meant to question, to read the stars or ponder the river's moods. Thinking bred discontent, and discontent was the devil's spark. Yet Margaret absorbed everything, the cycles of planting and harvest, the master's ledgers glimpsed through cracked doors, the Bible stories twisted to justify bondage. She saw the irony in Gaines preaching about the prodigal son while selling off wayward workers. Her mind wove these threads into a tapestry of quiet rebellion, infused with spiritual hunger. In stolen moments, she'd kneel in the dirt, whispering pleas to a God who parted seas for the Israelites, why not rivers for her? At 19, she wed Robert Garner, a union born not of romance's bloom but necessity's thorn. Robert, owned by James Marshall on the neighboring spread, was a tower of quiet strength, his dark skin etched with scars from tobacco knives and auction blocks. Sold twice before, once as a boy, ripped from his mother's arms like Isaac nearly sacrificed, he carried the weight of impermanence. His hands, calloused and powerful, could mend a fence or cradle a child with equal tenderness. Their marriage, unsanctioned by law, was sealed with a broom jump under a canopy of stars, witnesses murmuring blessings that invoked ancestral spirits and a vengeful Jehovah. What God hath joined, they intoned, knowing masters could sunder it with a signature. In those early days, their love was a sanctuary amid the storm. Robert would slip across the fields under cover of night, his footsteps muffled by fallen leaves, to steal hours in Margaret's arms. They'd whisper dreams of freedom, fingers tracing maps on each other's skin, imagining a world beyond the river's grasp. But love in bondage was laced with terror, attachment invited loss. Robert's eyes, deep pools of resilience, held shadows of past separations, families shattered at estate sales, echoes of cries that haunted his sleep. Their children arrived like fragile miracles, each one a testament to life's defiance. Mary, the eldest at nearly 3, inherited her mother's piercing gaze and her father's unyielding smile, her curiosity a spark that lit the dim cabin. She toddled after shadows, asking questions that made elders hush her. "Why can't we go cross the water, Mama?" Thomas and Samuel, 2 and 1, were bundles of energy, their laughter a brief balm against the overseer's glare. Stumbling on chubby legs, they chased fireflies in summer dusk, oblivious to the chains awaiting them. And baby Priscilla, 9 months old, named for her grandmother, nestled against Margaret's breast, her tiny fists clutching fabric as if sensing the fragility of their world. Margaret's love for them was a fierce, biblical fire, protective as David's sling against Goliath, sacrificial as Abraham's altar. She'd heard tales in the quarters, mothers wailing as children were auctioned south, their spirits breaking like dry twigs. Women who'd starved themselves into ghosts, haunted by empty arms. "Not my babies," Margaret vowed in silent prayers, her voice a tremor in the night. "Lord, if thou art just, spare them this hell." Her faith, forged in the furnace of oppression, blended Christian scripture with African echoes, stories of ancestors who communed with rivers as spirits, seeking liberation's path. Life on Maplewood ground on like a millstone, days blurring into a rhythm of toil and trepidation. Dawn cracked the sky with whip-like sharpness, summoning bodies to fields where backs bent under sun or sleet. Tobacco leaves, sticky and unforgiving, tore at skin, hemp ropes chafed wrists raw. Meals were meager, cornmeal mush, salted pork scraps, greens wilted from neglect eaten in haste, flavored with the dust of exhaustion. Sundays offered illusory respite, mending clothes by flickering rushlights, preparing thin stews over open fires, tending children whose play mimicked the chains they didn't yet understand. The work never ceased, it merely shifted, a constant reminder of ownership's yoke. Gaines, ordinary in his cruelty, embodied the system's insidious sin. Not a monster of legend, but a man who balanced ledgers with lives, who patted children's heads while appraising their future value. His church-going facade masked the rot, hymns of love sung over tables served by the unfree. "Blessed are the meek," he'd intone, blind to the meek's rising wrath. But in winter 1856, cracks appeared in his empire. Debts mounted like storm clouds, tobacco prices plummeted, railroad speculation soured. Whispers slithered through the big house, carried by house servants to the quarters, land sales, asset liquidations. And in Kentucky, assets breathed. The fear descended like a plague from Exodus, thick and suffocating. South, the rumors hissed, deep south, where cotton kings devoured souls in 5-year spans, bodies broken in sweltering fields, replaced like worn tools. Mississippi's mud, Louisiana's cane, Carolina's rice paddies, graveyards disguised as plantations. Sleep fled the cabins, eyes darted to the overseer's ledger, his boots crunching gravel like judgment's approach. Margaret's name appeared, scrawled in ink that might as well be blood. Robert's too. The children's innocence marked for sacrifice. It was then, on a night when frost etched windows like divine script, that resolve crystallized. The river had frozen 3 days prior, a rare bridge forged by winter's hand, perhaps God's subtle intervention, a Red Sea parting in reverse. Robert, through shadowed networks, connected with Elijah Kite, a free black man in Cincinnati, his home a beacon in the Underground Railroad's constellation. Kite's name passed in coded hymns, his aid a whisper of hope amid despair. They plotted in fragments, midnight murmurs, glances exchanged over work. 9 souls committed: Margaret, Robert, their 4 young ones, and Robert's parents, Simon and Mary, elders whose joints ache like ancient prophecies. Simon, stooped but spirited, quoted Job's endurance. Mary, frail yet fierce, clutched a tattered Bible page, its words a talisman against the dark. January 27, post-midnight. The world slept under a blanket of silence, broken only by the ice's distant moans, laments of the drowned, or angels urging flight. Margaret bundled baby Priscilla close, her warmth a flickering life against the cold's bite. The air stung like retribution, numbing extremities, testing faith. Mary gripped Robert's hand, her steps faltering but determined. Thomas and Samuel, drowsy from herbal draughts, Priscilla's recipe, a risky mercy, were hoisted by grandparents, their breaths soft puffs in the chill. They slipped into the night like ghosts evading purgatory, footsteps muffled on frozen ground. The fields lay barren, stubble crunching underfoot, moonlight casting long shadows that danced like accusing fingers. The main house hulked in the distance, its silhouette a brooding idol, windows dark voids that seemed to watch, to judge. Margaret refused to glance back, Lot's wife a cautionary tale, salt pillars born of hesitation. The river loomed at 1 a.m., a frozen expanse gleaming like polished judgment stone. Stars mirrored on its surface, a celestial map of escape or damnation. Ice could deceive, solid one moment, cracking the next, swallowing the unwary into watery graves. Bodies surfaced in spring thaws, bloated warnings to the bold. Robert tested first, each step a probe into uncertainty. The ice groaned a deep, resonant dirge, as if the river's spirit resisted their passage. He signaled, they followed, space like pilgrims on a sacred trek. Margaret stepped onto the slick plain, feeling it bow subtly, her heart pounding psalms of deliverance. Priscilla stirred against her, a reminder of stakes eternal. 20 agonizing minutes, breaths held, prayers silent. Wind whispered temptations to turn back, cold clotted resolve. Every creak echoed like cracking commandments, every shift a test of faith. Crossing wasn't mere flight, it was exodus, a spiritual reckoning against Pharaoh's grasp. On the Ohio shore, they emerged shadows reborn, but freedom's shore was no promised land. The marshals waited in the wings, law's hounds baying for blood. Margaret's act, born of love's desperation, would soon etch her name in history's ledger, not as victim, but as avenger, exposing slavery's demonic core. Divine justice, or human horror? The river knew, but kept its secrets frozen deep. The first rays of dawn pierced the frost-laced windows of Elijah Kite's cabin like hesitant fingers of judgment, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn floorboards. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood smoke and simmering stew, or rare warmth that enveloped the fugitives like a fleeting embrace from Providence itself. Mill Creek babbled faintly outside, its waters unfrozen here, murmuring secrets of escapes past and perils yet to come. Cincinnati loomed nearby, a bustling frontier city of steamboats and abolitionist whispers, where free black communities carved fragile footholds amid the encroaching tide of federal law. But in this hidden sanctuary, tucked amid skeletal trees stripped bare by winter's hand, hope flickered like the hearth's dying embers. Margaret Garner cradled baby Priscilla closer, feeling the infant's soft breaths against her chest, a rhythm that synced with her own pounding heart, a reminder of life's fragile sanctity. The crossing had been a trial by ice, each step a testament to faith tested in the crucible of desperation. Now, on Ohio soil, proclaimed free by maps and men who had never worn chains, they dared to exhale. Robert slumped against the wall, his broad shoulders heaving with exhaustion, scars from old whippings glistening in the firelight like stigmata of survival. His parents, Simon and Mary, huddled in the corner, their wrinkled hands clasped in silent prayer, invoking the God of Exodus who led slaves through parted waters. The children, Mary with her wide, wondering eyes, Thomas and Samuel, tousle-haired and innocent, curled on threadbare blankets, their small forms rising and falling in the merciful grip of sleep. Elijah Kite moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had shepherded souls through hell's antechamber before. Tall and gaunt, his gray hair framing a face etched with lines of quiet defiance, he embodied the Underground Railroad's unseen guardians, free blacks risking everything for kin they might never know. His wife, Sarah, a sturdy woman with calloused hands from years of laundering and hiding runaways, ladled soup into wooden bowls, hearty broth laced with carrots and potatoes, steam rising like incense offerings. The fugitives ate ravenously, the flavors exploding on tongues accustomed to cornbread crumbs and salted fatback. No words passed, gratitude hung unspoken, heavy as the quilt Sarah draped over the youngest. As bellies filled and eyelids drooped, Kite outlined the path ahead in a voice low as a confessional whisper. "Rest now," he urged, his eyes scanning the windows for shadows. At first light, we move north 20 miles to the Quaker's farm. False bottom wagon waits there, hidden compartments like the Ark's secret holds. From thence, leaps to Canada, barns, attics, sympathetic souls guided by the North Star. His words painted visions of redemption, a land where chains dissolved like manna in the desert, where children learned letters from books, not lashes. Margaret allowed the seed of hope to take root in her soul, a dangerous bloom in slavery's barren soil. She envisioned Mary laughing in sunlit fields, unbound, the boys growing tall without the yoke's weight, Priscilla's first steps on earth that didn't claim her as chattel. Hope was a double-edged sword, slicing through despair but leaving vulnerability in its wake. In Scripture, hope endured, but here it felt like tempting fate's cruel jest. Yet the divine, it seemed, had other designs. As the sky blushed with dawn's false promise, a pounding shattered the fragile peace like the hammer of judgment on heaven's anvil. Fists and rifle butts assaulted the door, splintering wood with profane urgency. Voices bellowed from the cold, "Open in the name of the law. Federal marshals, surrender the fugitives." Margaret's eyes flew open, a chill deeper than winter's bite seizing her spirit. Betrayal's serpent had slithered in, perhaps a neighbor's greedy eye, a whispered bounty, or the devil's own whisper in a weak ear. The cabin, once a refuge like Noah's Ark, now transformed into a trap, its walls closing like the jaws of Leviathan. Robert surged to his feet, muscles coiling like a cornered lion, barring the door with his body. "Hold fast," he growled, but the wood groaned in protest. Simon rose too, his elderly frame trembling with righteous fury, invoking psalms. "The wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow, but the Lord is a shield." Mary clutched her Bible fragment, lips moving in frantic prayer. The children stirred, whimpers rising like lamentations. Elijah Kite paled, grabbing a poker from the fire, but Sarah's face hardened into resolve, shielding the little ones. The door burst inward in a shower of splinters, admitting a flood of intruders, 6 marshals, burly and badge-clad, pistols gleaming like accusatory eyes in the dim light. Their boots thudded on the floor like falling gavel strikes, faces twisted in the grim zeal of enforcers. Behind them loomed the true demons, John Pollard Gaines and James Marshall, plantation lords with coats dusted in snow, expressions of triumphant malice. Gaines's eyes, cold as the river's ice, locked on Margaret, a gaze laced with ownership's poison, seeing not a woman but a ledger entry escaped. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 hung over them like a cursed edict, a federal abomination that turned free states into hunting grounds. No warrants needed, no trials granted, runaways were mere property, to be seized and returned like stray livestock. Ohio's soil meant nothing, freedom was a mirage, dissolved by ink on parchment. One marshal lunged at Robert, slamming him against the wall with a crack of bone on wood, breath reeking of tobacco and authority. "Down, boy," he snarled. Another struck Simon across the face with a rifle butt, blood blooming like a crimson rose on the old man's cheek. Mary screamed, a piercing wail that echoed biblical mother's grief. Baby Priscilla's cries joined the cacophony, a chorus of innocence violated. Chaos erupted, bodies colliding, furniture overturning, the air thick with fear's metallic tang. Margaret's mind raced like a storm-tossed sea, visions flashing, children sold south, whipped, broken, her own body violated anew, souls crushed under slavery's millstone. No. Not this. Not eternal damnation in living flesh. In a blur of maternal fury, she seized the butcher knife from the table, a heavy blade, its edge honed for bread but now consecrated for sacrifice. The metal felt cold in her grip, heavy with purpose, like Abraham's knife poised over Isaac, testing faith's ultimate demand. Witnesses later clashed in testimony, some claiming she wailed like a banshee from hell's depths, others insisting on eerie silence, a stoic resolve born of divine conviction. But the act was undeniable. Margaret grasped Mary by the arm, pulling her close in a final, fierce embrace. The child's eyes widened in confusion, small hands reaching up. With one swift, resolute stroke, the blade sliced across the tender throat. Blood arced in a vivid spray, painting the cabin wall in scarlet judgment, splattering the floor like sacrificial libations on an altar of despair. Mary's body slumped, life ebbing in gurgling gasps, her gaze fading from wonder to void. The warmth of her blood soaked Margaret's dress, a baptism and horror and mercy intertwined. The room froze in stunned tableau, marshals' faces paling like ghosts witnessing the profane. Silence descended, broken only by the drip-drip of blood seeping into floor cracks, a metronome of mortality, echoing the heartbeat of a nation on trial. Margaret turned, knife aloft, eyes blazing with prophetic fire, advancing on Thomas. Better death than chains, she might have whispered, her soul invoking the Pharaoh's plagues, where firstborns perished to free the oppressed. The spell shattered. 2 marshals tackled her, slamming her to the blood-slick floor with brutal force. Pain exploded in her ribs, face grinding against wood grains sticky with her daughter's essence. The knife skittered away, trailing crimson like a comet's tail. Robert roared, lunging forward, only to be clubbed down, blows raining like hailstones of wrath. Simon and Mary were herded like cattle, the baby wrenched from Sarah's arms amid piercing shrieks. Elijah protested futilely, his words lost in the tempest. Pinned and bound, Margaret lay unresisting, her gaze fixed on Mary's shrouded form under a hasty blanket. The child's eyes stared blankly, a silent accusation against the world's iniquity. Marshal John Joliffe, ironically sharing a name with her future defender, loomed over her, demanding, "What madness is this, woman?" Blood-smeared, Margaret met his eyes with unyielding calm. "I will not let them drag my children back to that hell," she declared, voice steady as scripture. "I'll send them to God first, free in his kingdom, not slaves in yours." Her words hung like a divine decree, exposing slavery's satanic core, a system so vile it inverted love into lethality. Gaines bellowed orders, face purple with rage, restraining Margaret, securing the survivors. Marshall accused the marshals of bungling, while Kite denied foreknowledge, his sanctuary profaned. The other children, sobbing, reached for their mother as she was hauled outside, ropes biting her wrists like thorns of a crown. A crowd had amassed, neighbors drawn by the din, faces a mosaic of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. Snow fell softly now, blanketing the scene in ironic purity, as Margaret was loaded into a wagon. Whispers rippled, monster or martyr? Newspapers would sensationalize, branding her a fiend, but in her heart, certainty burned cold, no regret, only the peace of a mother who chose mercy's blade over bondage's slow death. Death, in biblical lore, was a doorway to paradise, slavery, and endless abyss. The trial ignited on January 28, 1856, mere hours after the bloodletting, a whirlwind of legal thunder in Cincinnati's Hamilton County Courthouse. Marble columns soared like pillars of justice, high ceilings amplifying every utterance into echoes of eternity. Crowds packed the benches, abolitionists in somber attire, pro-slavery sympathizers with sneers, reporters scribbling furiously. The air hummed with tension, scented with ink and sweat, as if the building itself held its breath. This was no mere fugitive hearing. Ohio's murder charge against Margaret created a Gordian knot of jurisprudence. The Fugitive Slave Act deemed her property returnable without due process, her act irrelevant as one chattel couldn't murder another. Yet charging her as a murderer affirmed her personhood, clashing with federal edict like Moses' staff against Pharaoh's serpents. The case transcended one woman, it probed America's soul. Could a nation founded on liberty's hymn sustain slavery's dirge? Abolitionists hailed Margaret as icon, a mother incarnating the system's abomination, her deed a mirror to its evil. Proof, they argued, that bondage twists the divine image into despair. Pro-slavery voices decried her as savage, validating chains as necessary restraint on irrational beasts. Sketches in papers depicted her stoic, enigmatic eyes like abyssal wells, reflecting viewers' prejudices. Her defender, John Joliffe, note the spelling variants from the marshal, a grizzled abolitionist in his 50s, boomed arguments with courtroom thunder. Gray-haired and resolute, he'd battled in fugitive cases, viewing this as slavery's Waterloo. Try her for murder, he thundered, and affirm her humanity or return her as thing, exposing the law's hypocrisy. Conviction meant the gallows, but as a free soul accountable before God and man. Return meant life, but in chains, children doomed. Margaret chose death's dignity, her silence a profound assent. Federal prosecutors, proxies for Gaines and Marshall, countered with icy logic: property has no agency. The act overrides state whims. The victim was asset destroyed, reimburse, not retry. Witnesses paraded, marshals' tales veered, calm execution or frenzied panic shaped by interrogators. Kite disavowed violence, Gaines painted Margaret rebellious, justifying her sail south. She herself? Muted by law, enslaved voices inadmissible, a cruel irony underscoring her non-person status. Weeks dragged, precedents clashing like swords in spiritual warfare. Abolitionist luminaries rallied, Harriet Beecher Stowe attended, later journaling Margaret's courageous tragedy, her Uncle Tom's Cabin echoes amplified. Frederick Douglass thundered in the North Star, "What infernal machine drives a mother to infanticide? Slavery, the nation's original sin." Pro-slavery rags retorted, Louisville Courier dubbed her savage beast, Richmond Inquirer claimed she proved blacks' unfitness for freedom. Margaret endured in silence, a living parable, guilt, sin, justice swirling. Her act, chilling in spiritual undertones, evoked divine retribution, a mother's love as fierce as God's jealousy, preferring heavenly embrace to earthly torment. The trial's legacy haunted, a crack in slavery's facade, foretelling Civil War's blood atonement. In that courtroom, America's demons were unmasked, begging redemption or ruin. The courtroom's heavy oak doors swung shut on February 26, 1856, with a thud that reverberated like the closing of a tomb, sealing Margaret Garner's fate in the annals of a nation's fractured conscience. The Hamilton County Courthouse, its marble pillars standing sentinel like indifferent gods, had become a theater of the absurd, a place where humanity was debated as if it were a philosophical abstraction rather than the beating heart in Margaret's chest. Judge Jacob Flynn, his robes flowing like a shroud, delivered the verdict with the detached precision of a ledger keeper. The Fugitive Slave Act reigned supreme. Margaret and her surviving family were property, to be remanded to Kentucky without further ado. The murder charge against her dissolved like mist in the morning sun, dismissed as irrelevant in the face of federal mandate. No recognition of her personhood, no acknowledgement of the blood she'd spilled in a desperate bid for her children's souls. Just a cold affirmation of the system's core lie: some lives were chattel, void of divine spark. Outside, Cincinnati's streets buzzed with the clamor of a divided populace, horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestones, vendors hawking broadsheets with sensational headlines, the air thick with the scent of river mud and coal smoke from steamboats churning the Ohio's waters. Abolitionists, clustered in knots of fervent whispers, decried the ruling as a betrayal of natural law, their faces flushed with righteous indignation. "This is not justice," one pamphlet screamed in bold ink, distributed by hands trembling with fury, "but the devil's bargain, trading souls for cotton profits." Pro-slavery sympathizers, meanwhile, nodded in grim approval, their conversations laced with warnings of anarchy should such savages roam free. The newspapers amplified the divide. Northern presses like the Liberator thundered against the verdict, invoking biblical plagues upon a land that permitted such iniquity. Southern rags, such as the Louisville Courier, branded Margaret a beast in human guise, her actions proof that the enslaved required the civilizing lash to curb their inherent barbarism. Margaret herself, escorted from the dock in irons that clinked like accusatory bells, met the ruling with an inscrutable calm. Her eyes, those sharp obsidian depths that had pierced through overseers and judges alike, betrayed no tears, no pleas, only a quiet resolve, as if she'd peered into the abyss of eternity and found peace in her choices. In the spiritual undercurrents of her soul, forged in the fire of Priscilla's whispered psalms and the quarter's midnight prayers, she saw her deed not as sin but as sacred intervention. Like the Hebrew midwives defying Pharaoh, or Rahab hiding spies in Jericho, she had chosen defiance over submission, mercy over prolonged torment. "The Lord giveth and taketh away," she might have murmured in the solitude of her cell, her voice a faint echo against stone walls damp with winter's chill. But the law, blind to such celestial reckonings, decreed her return to the very hell she'd fled. The crossing back to Kentucky unfolded under a leaden sky, the Ohio River swollen with early spring thaw, its waters murmuring like restless spirits beneath the ferry's hull. Gaines and Marshall, their faces masks of proprietary satisfaction, supervised the transfer. Margaret shackled at wrists and ankles, Robert a silent shadow beside her, the children Thomas and Samuel clinging to skirts with wide-eyed terror, baby Priscilla nursing fitfully against her mother's breast. The shoreline receded like a fading dream of liberty, Cincinnati's spires dissolving into haze, replaced by Boone County's rolling hills, tobacco fields lying fallow under frost's brittle crust. Maplewood Plantation awaited like a brooding idol, its white columns gleaming falsely in the weak sunlight, a monument to hypocrisy where Gaines preached Christian charity from a pulpit built on stolen lives. Upon arrival, isolation became her new chain. Confined to a solitary cabin at the quarter's edge, its walls rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, floor a packed earth that reeked of mildew and despair, Margaret was denied the communal solace of her kin. Guards patrolled, their boots crunching gravel like grinding teeth, rifles glinting in lantern light. Robert and the children were spirited away to Marshall's neighboring estate, forbidden contact, a deliberate fracture to splinter her spirit. Night stretched eternal, the wind howling through cracks like the wails of the damned, carrying faint echoes of children's laughter from distant cabins. In this purgatory, Margaret knelt on the dirt floor, her prayers a tapestry of grief and defiance. O Lord, who delivered Daniel from the lion's den, why hast thou forsaken thy handmaiden? Yet regret eluded her. Mary's spirit, freed from earthly bonds, danced in her visions as an angel untainted by slavery's stain. Death, in her biblical reckoning, was not end but exodus, a passage to Canaan where no whips cracked, no auctions sundered families. Gaines, ever the pragmatic sinner, plotted in the big house's opulent parlor, maps spread under crystal chandeliers, cigar smoke curling like serpents. The trial's glare had made Margaret infamous. An open sale risked riots or rescues from emboldened abolitionists. Let the storm pass, he confided to Marshall over brandy, the fire's glow casting demonic shadows on their faces. But the storm swelled. Northern presses churned out engravings of Margaret, stoic, ethereal, her gaze challenging the viewer, paired with shackled wrists and pleas, "Am I not a woman and a sister?" Jolliffe, undeterred, fired appeals like arrows, citing constitutional violations, natural rights, even the Sermon on the Mount's call to mercy. Theologians debated in pulpits, was her act akin to Samson's suicidal pull of the temple, bringing down oppression at personal cost? Philosophers invoked Locke and Rousseau, arguing innate liberty superseded man-made laws. Yet the machinery of bondage ground on, indifferent to such celestial arguments. By March, impatience won. Gaines arranged a discreet sale, Margaret, Robert, and the 3 children to Judge Archibald Bonham, a cotton baron in Mississippi's Issaquena County, a swampy inferno where fortunes rose on the backs of the broken. No fanfare, no auction block, just a quiet transfer, souls bartered like bales. On March 22, under a dawn sky streaked with omens of red, they were herded onto the Henry Louis, a hulking steamboat laden with cotton stacks, lowing livestock, and 37 chained humans bound south. The deck creaked underfoot, the paddle wheels' rhythmic churn a dirge for lost hopes. Margaret, irons biting her flesh, stood at the rail, wind whipping her skirts, eyes fixed on the receding Kentucky shore. The river, that biblical divider of fates, now betrayed her anew, its currents carrying them toward the deep South Sma, where life expectancy withered to 7 years amid fever swamps and relentless toil. Priscilla nestled against her, tiny fists clutching fabric, oblivious to the doom. Robert, chained apart, met Margaret's gaze with silent communion, a love forged in fire, now tempered by separation's blade. Thomas and Samuel, unrestrained but shadowed by watchful crew, played fitfully with knotted ropes, their innocence a stark contrast to the hull's moans below. The boat sliced through brown waters high with runoff, smokestacks belching soot that mingled with the scent of damp wood and human sweat. Margaret's thoughts swirled like eddies, freedom's shore so near, yet eternally distant, her children's futures a canvas of horror unless intervened by Providence or her hand. Fate, or divine wrath, struck near Louisville, just past midnight on March 23. The Henry Louis collided with the Edward Howard in a cataclysmic embrace, hulls grinding with a roar like thunder from Sinai, timbers splintering, screams piercing the night. Chaos erupted, passengers tumbling, cargo avalanching into the frothing river. Margaret, hurled against the railing, chains preventing balance, plummeted overboard with Priscilla clutched tight. The water engulfed them cold as judgment's grip, dark as Sheol's depths. Witnesses swore she jumped deliberately, others claimed accident. But in the submerged tumult, Margaret held the infant under, bubbles rising like departing souls, until stillness claimed her. Mercy, again, in the form of drowning, Priscilla's spirit ascending unscarred by whips or auctions. Crewmen dove in, hauling Margaret aboard, sodden and unresisting, chains dragging like anchors. Priscilla's body floated briefly, then was recovered downstream, logged as accidental drowning due to collision. No inquiry, no charges. In the South's calculus, a slave child's life weighed less than spilled cargo. The Henry Louis limped southward, Margaret staring at the wake as if communing with the river's ghosts, her expression a mask of ethereal peace amid the crew's horrified murmurs. Issaquah County swallowed her whole, a vast, mosquito-haunted delta of 3,000 acres, 200 souls toiling under Bonham's iron rule. Cotton fields stretched infinite, white bowls like mocking shrouds under a merciless sun. Mortality stalked the quarters, malaria's chills, yellow fever's jaundice, cholera's purge claiming dozens yearly, bodies dumped in unmarked pits like discarded husks. Margaret was thrust into the gangs, dawn to dusk labor bending her over rows, hands shredded by thorny pods, back aflame with strain. Overseers, whip-wielding pharaohs, enforced quotas with lashes that split skin like lightning bolts, their shouts echoing scripture's curses upon the unfaithful. Whispers followed her, the one who chose the blade over bondage. Admiration mingled with dread in the quarter's hushed tales. Some saw her as avenging angel, others as cursed by her own hand. But all understood slavery's evil inverted maternal love into lethal shield. Robert vanished to Arkansas's rice paddies, Thomas and Samuel to Louisiana's cane fields, family fractured, a standard torment to erode resistance. Nothing to lose means nothing to fight for, the master sneered. Margaret endured mechanically, her spirit a fortress amid the mire. Silent in the fields, eyes downcast but unbroken, she moved like a specter haunting her own life. No bonds formed, isolation was her armor. But summer 1857 brought cholera's scythe, a plague sweeping the delta like biblical retribution, bodies convulsing in fevered agony, graves multiplying at the swamp's edge. Margaret fell ill in late August, wasting away in a fever dream of visions, Mary's smile in heavenly light, Priscilla's bubbles as baptismal waters, a God who weighed souls on scales of justice. The doctor, a callous vet for human livestock, offered no aid. Medicine was for valuables, not expendables. On September 14, 1857, at 23, Margaret exhaled her last, body wrapped in coarse sheet and consigned to a mass grave, unmarked as her birth. The ledger noted, Margaret, deceased, cholera. Erased, like countless others, from history's page. Yet her essence lingered, a spiritually chilling specter. Trial records, though censored, endured, newspapers preserved her saga's fragments. Abolitionists canonized her, Harriet Beecher Stowe drew from her tragedy in later writings, portraying slavery's maternal horrors, Frederick Douglass hailed her in autobiography as a paragon of love transcending life, William Lloyd Garrison demanded remembrance, her sacrifice a clarion against complacency. Pamphlets flooded the North, her image a rallying icon, this is slavery's fruit, mothers turned executioners by your silence. In the South, she became bogeyman, editorials in the Charleston Mercury and New Orleans Picayune decried her barbarism, fueling calls for harsher laws, tighter patrols, severer penalties for abettors. Border states tightened nooses, fearing her example's contagion. Even abolitionists divided, some exalted her heroism, akin to biblical martyrs, others recoiled, fearing infanticide's glorification tainted their cause. Debates raged in halls and presses. Was it justified rebellion or unforgivable sin? Trust in God's timing, or seize deliverance by any means? What eluded them, free and unfettered, was Margaret's profound knowing born of chains' intimate cruelty. Not madness, but clarity, slavery was the true abomination, a demonic inversion of God's order, demanding extreme atonement. Her case ignited unseen fires, northern recruitment surged, propaganda painting slavery's visage, southern paranoia bred repression, accelerating the schism. 4 years later, Civil War's cannons roared, abolition in 1865 a blood-soaked redemption. But Margaret's query echoed eternally, was freedom worth death's embrace? In unmarked graves in national memory, her ghost demanded answer, a haunting legacy of divine justice deferred, chilling the soul of a nation built on buried sins. The weight of unspoken truths hung over the American landscape like a shroud woven from the threads of denial and dread, a fabric that concealed the festering wounds of a nation built on the backs of the broken. In the aftermath of Margaret Garner's trial, as the ink dried on the judge's decree and the echoes of courtroom arguments faded into the chill Cincinnati winds, the real battle raged not in legal tomes but in the collective soul of a people unwilling to confront the abyss. The Fugitive Slave Act had triumphed, affirming Margaret as mere property, a chattel to be reclaimed, her humanity dissolved in the acid of precedent. But her actions, that swift arc of the butcher knife in Elijah Kite's cabin, had rent the veil, exposing slavery's demonic essence, a system not of benevolence, as Southern apologists preached from pulpits adorned with ill-gotten finery, but of unrelenting torment that inverted love into lethality, faith into fatalism. Picture the scene in the days following the verdict: Cincinnati's cobblestone streets slick with melting snow, horse-drawn wagons rumbling past taverns where men huddled over Elish, debating in hushed tones the mad slave woman's fate. The air carried the sharp tang of coal smoke from riverboats, mingling with the faint, acrid scent of printing presses churning out broadsheets that twisted her story into cautionary fables. Northern abolitionists, clad in somber wool coats, gathered in dimly lit parlors illuminated by whale oil lamps, their faces etched with fervent resolve. They penned fiery missives to congressmen, invoking the Declaration's sacred truths: all men are created equal, while quoting Jeremiah's laments over a land defiled by injustice. Yet even they, in their zeal, skirted the precipice of Margaret's calculus, that death, swift and merciful, was a divine gift compared to the slow crucifixion of bondage. In the South, pro-slavery editors in Richmond and Charleston wielded their quills like swords, branding Margaret a savage aberration, her deed proof of the enslaved's inherent barbarity, necessitating the civilizing chains of mastery. This is what transpires when Negroes entertain notions beyond their station, one editorial thundered, its words dripping with the venom of fear, for if a mother's love could drive her to such extremes, what rebellion might brew in the quarters under the moon's judgmental gaze? The spiritual undertones chilled the bone. Was Margaret an instrument of God's retribution, like the plagues upon Egypt, or a fallen Eve, tempted by the serpent of freedom into unforgivable sin? The Bible, that double-edged tome wielded by both sides, offered no easy solace. Exodus promised deliverance, but Leviticus demanded blood for atonement. Margaret herself, returned to Maplewood under armed escort, embodied this spiritual schism. Shackled in an isolated cabin at the plantation's fringe, its walls groaning under winter gales like the sighs of restless spirits, she knelt on the earthen floor, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust, perhaps crosses, perhaps maps to an afterlife unmarred by whips. The air inside was stale, heavy with the musty odor of unwashed linens and the faint, metallic tang of her own blood from chafed wrists. Guards patrolled outside, their lanterns casting erratic shadows through cracks, like demonic eyes peering into her solitude. Separated from Robert and the children, she whispered psalms into the void, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." But her faith was no passive surrender, it was forged in the furnace of experience, a fierce conviction that God's justice sometimes demanded human hands to wield the sword. What the history books gloss over, what the edited transcripts buried in dusty archives omit, is the premeditated sanctity of her choice. The night before the escape. Under a sky pricked with stars like indifferent witnesses, Margaret had forged a covenant with herself, a blood oath sworn in the silence of her soul. If captured, she vowed, she would not consign her offspring to the infernal cycle she'd endured: the violations in the master's shadow, the auctions where families shattered like brittle clay, the fields where backs bent until spirits broke. Rape was the system's unspoken sacrament, a ritual of domination that echoed the biblical ravages of conquered peoples: Hagar's exile, Tamar's despair. Margaret had borne it, her light skin a visible scar of Archibald Gaines's nocturnal sins, his seed planted in violation, yielding children who carried the curse forward. She'd witnessed her mother Priscilla endure the same, her body a battlefield claimed by white entitlement, miscarriages beaten out like unwelcome intruders. In the quarters, tales whispered of men lynched for stealing glances at forbidden letters, women flogged until their wombs wept blood, children auctioned south to Cotton's voracious maw where 7 years was a lifetime, bodies discarded like husked corn. Margaret's calculation was no frenzy of panic, it was a lucid judgment, rooted in knowledge no free soul could fathom. Life under slavery was not existence but erosion, a slow devouring of the divine image, where survival meant complicity in one's own damnation. Death, then, became redemption, a swift passage to Abraham's bosom, spared the Pharaoh's lash. Better the grave's embrace than the chain's eternal kiss, she might have thought, her mind a whirlwind of scriptural fragments: Samson's final pull, Jephthah's vow, the innocents slain in Herod's rage. When the marshals breached Kite's door that fateful dawn, the cabin erupting in a maelstrom of shouts and splintering wood, Margaret's resolve crystallized like frost on a grave. The air reeked of gunpowder and fierce wet, firelight dancing on walls now splashed with chaos. She seized the knife not in madness, but with the calm of a high priestess at the altar. Mary first, the eldest, her bright eyes already shadowing with the world's cruelties, her small frame a vessel too fragile for the storms ahead. The blade's kiss was swift, blood blooming like a crimson rose of martyrdom, pooling on the floorboards in patterns that evoked the stigmata. Witnesses later sanitized the horror: she screamed, or she didn't, she hesitated, or she was possessed. But the truth, whispered in suppressed testimonies, was her intent to claim them all. Thomas next, his toddler grasp on her skirt, a plea she answered with steel, only thwarted by tackling arms. Samuel and Priscilla would have followed, souls dispatched to paradise before the system's taint could claim them. In private confessions to Jolliffe, never committed to public record, perhaps scrawled in his journal by candlelight, the wax dripping like tears, she expressed no remorse, only lament for her slowness. "I should have been swifter, like the angel of death in Egypt," she confided, her voice a hollow echo in the cell's confines, where chains rattled like accusatory chains. Jolliffe, abolitionist firebrand with a barrister's poise, faltered, his world of rhetoric and reform ill-equipped for such raw theology. He nodded, promising salvation through appeals, but the law's machinery ground inexorably, blind to the soul's pleas. This revelation pierced the nation's hypocritical heart. If slavery's benevolence was gospel, why choose annihilation over it? Margaret's act was an apocalypse, unveiling the institution's satanic core: rape as routine, families as commodities, labor as living death. Abolitionists, though uneasy with infanticide's shadow, wielded her as emblem. Harriet Beecher Stowe chronicled her in diaries. Frederick Douglass thundered indictments, seeing in her a mirror to the system's evil. Yet they tempered praise, fearing it fueled foes' narratives of black savagery. Pro-slavery voices, in panic, amplified the monster myth. Editorials in Southern presses depicted her as demonic, justifying tighter chains, harsher patrols, laws that sowed seeds of the coming cataclysm. Buried she was, in obscurity's soil, sold south, family sundered, death by cholera in Issaquina's fevered swamps. No marker graced her grave, plowed under for cotton, later asphalt erased, like myriad souls before her. But erasure failed, her specter rose. In 1867, Lucy Stone addressed the American Anti-Slavery Society, her voice cutting through the assembly's hush. "The worst evil of slavery is that it renders death preferable to life, driving a mother to slay her child." Silence followed, a collective reckoning deferred. The Civil War erupted 4 years post her demise, a blood atonement for national sin, emancipation in 1865 a partial absolution. Yet Margaret's query lingered, resurfacing in civil rights marches, where activists invoked her to unmask enduring inequities. In the 1980s, Toni Morrison resurrected her in Beloved, a Pulitzer-winning novel that fictionalized her saga, weaving ghosts and memory into a tapestry of haunting beauty. Morrison, Nobel laureate, grasped the spiritual chill, Seed's act, Margaret's echo, as love's grotesque distortion, a mother's ghost returning to demand remembrance. The book, required reading in schools, pierced modern veils, forcing confrontations with slavery's unhealed scars, rape's legacy and wealth built on violated bodies, families' fractures echoing in generational trauma. Through Beloved, adapted to film with Oprah's gravitas, Margaret transcended fragments, trial transcripts, biased clippings, abolitionist tracts. An opera bore her name, voices soaring in lamentation. Historians unearthed details: her true age, perhaps 22 at death, the sexual assaults that birthed her children, the Deep South's mortality mills. Her legacy? A chilling testament to divine justice's demands, guilt etched in national DNA, redemption elusive. Reparations debates invoke her. What price for souls commodified? History curricula grapple, sanitize, or reveal the raw. In unmarked earth, her bones mingle with the oppressed, but her spirit accuses. America, prosperous on plundered lives, must atone. The wealth of cotton kings, the power of a union forged in chains, built on rapes uncounted, labors unending, violence is casual. To forget is sin, to remember, salvation. Margaret was no monster, but martyr, a woman whose love defied hell, proving some existences mock God's image. Her question endures: was death mercy? In whispers of wind over forgotten fields, in pages of Beloved, in souls seeking justice, she answers, yes. And America, haunted, strives to disprove it still. What echoes does this tale stir in your heart? Was Margaret's blade an act of heroism or horror? Share below, let your voice join the chorus against erasure. If her defiance chills yet inspires, like, share, subscribe. History's shadows demand light, Margaret Garner demands remembrance.